Yes, good. Kia ora, welcome everyone. So nice to see you here on I was going to say snowy, it's now turned sunny, day here on Kukunamakis, the land of the raven here in the Elk Valley. I'm Robin Peel, the Community Economic Development Manager with Community Futures East Kootenay, and have the privilege of leading on this Innovate for Impact project with Impact Toolbox. And these workshops are part of that. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Sarah, for those of you who know a lot about the Innovate for Impact. Those of you here are key parts of this, and we're so great that you are a part of this. But for those who might be watching the recording and don't know, the Innovate for Impact project is funded by the Ministry of Jobs and Economic Growth. And is a project between Community Futures East Kootenay and Impact Toolbox. And it's all about advancing social enterprise development in our rural regions. And all parts of the program are free thanks to this funding that we have. So if you go to the next slide, we have so many different parts of these projects. We have incubation programs, both for those looking at starting social enterprises, but also those who are growing and thriving and stabilizing. We have these monthly workshops, bi-monthly workshops that are recorded and then put on our website. We have a quarterly community of practice. We have impact summits. We have our youth program out in our mainly high schools, supporting the youth in our area to look at social enterprise development. We are working with our post-secondary to have opportunities for them to involve themselves in social enterprise development. And then we're also having hackathons of in-person support to really allow us to grow this ecosystem and make massive change to ensure that our Kootenays are great places to work, live, and play. And I'm joined today by Sarah and Kerry for this workshop, and so you'll won't hear from me again. Just go to the next slide. I know that those of you who are here know us really well, but for those again who might be watching the recording, if you want to use that QR code to access updates, we do, because we've got so many different projects we're working on, we do send out regular updates of what's opening, what's closing, how to access, when the next workshop is, what the next topic is, so make sure you sign up that way. So that is me done now until the end when we get to have the really interesting conversations. We're having about half an hour here of presentations, and then we'll open it up to everyone here to have chats about financing. And so, Sarah, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself. Sarah's going to speak, and then she'll hand over to Kerry Sanderman, and then we'll come to chatting at the end. So anything that as we're going along, if you've got some questions, throw them in the chat because we won't stop now. And at the end, we'll kind of go through those questions and answer. So, Sarah, all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. So nice to meet you all. I am joining from Kelowna, and I'm so thankful and grateful to have the opportunity to work and live on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Okanagan Silex people. And just a little bit of background about myself. I am a CPA CA, so I'm going to talk to you about financing. But I've spent my entire career in business education and designing and developing education for adult learners. And to that end, I have been an instructor at UBC Okanagan and Okanagan College for many years. As well, I own my own learning design firm. So just a little bit of background about me and context for asking questions. So for the part that I'm going to speak to you about today is really focusing on financing. And as you know, a lot of social enterprises, you have a very powerful mission and very real community need. But oftentimes we come up against the question, well, how are we actually going to do this and fund this in a sustainable way? So my hope for you is that over the next 25 to 30 minutes, I'll help you to shift financing from something that's maybe mysterious or overwhelming into something that's a little bit more clearer and practical. And so we're going to talk about how social enterprises can move from a grant mindset to more into business and a financing mindset. And think about what are some of the financing pathways that might be available to you. Once I'm done, I'll turn it over to Carrie, and she's going to do a deeper dive on community futures and lending. Okay, so for the part that I'm going to cover, first we're going to talk about the mindset shift, moving from that grant logic to finance logic. Then next, I'll spend some time talking about revenue and hopefully providing some clarity because when we think about obtaining financing, it doesn't start with just getting the money. We have to really think deeply about who's going to pay how much and why, and not just from a financing standpoint, but also from a revenue generation standpoint. And then third, I'm going to walk through the main financing pathways that are often available to social enterprises. And we'll talk a little bit about what different funders and lenders might be looking for. And so my hope is that by the time we're done, you'll have a much clearer sense of what kind of financing might make sense for your enterprise and also what you might want to have ready before you pursue it. Okay, so I have an idea. How do I get funding or how do I get some money? This is a common question and one that many of you may be up against. And so one of the things we want to think about is really thinking about financing and not just assuming that it starts with money. We really need to become much clearer about what the enterprise exists for. So who is this enterprise for? What problem does it solve? And then how will the money flow through that model? So today is really about building that foundation. And one of the biggest shifts for social enterprises is this idea of moving from a grant mindset to a financing mindset. And I don't know those that are listening or viewing this recording, but it's possible that up until now you may have had the fortunate opportunity to receive grants, and those grants are often designed to fund activities. So fund a program or a pilot or a project. Or maybe even a set of specific defined outcomes. But when we think about financing, we're really thinking about something that's different. So, financing, which might be a loan or an investment or some community capital, it's about funding a business model. And that means that the organization or the group that's providing that financing is expecting something in return. Now, what they're expecting in return could be a repayment of the funds or some sort of return, say through dividends if it's an investment, or some measurable value, something demonstrable through what you have achieved in your enterprise. That's somewhat different than a grant, which is often giving you the money in exchange for what are you going to do with it. Financing is different. It changes and it asks, how is what you're going to do sustain itself over time? There isn't an end point in mind that there often is with grants. Instead, with financing, we're looking at into the future. How is this financing going to propel you into a point of sustainability? And so that's a really, really important feature to be mindful of. When we're thinking about social enterprises, we're really thinking about businesses that have a purpose, not just projects. So not just something that has an end or ultimate outcomes. The impact is the reason you exist, but the business model is how you're going to survive into the future. And that's why this matters. So financing doesn't just start with money, it starts with clarity. So clarity about what you sell or what you provide and who's going to pay and whether that model of what you sell and who pays is going to work and sustain itself into the future. And that's going to help lenders and potential financiers see that this business model is realistic. So when we're thinking about how do you get ready? How do you get ready to actually get clarity around some of these questions? There are helpful to define. So first, what are you actually selling? And sometimes there can be some hesitation here because you might, if I were to ask you to describe your social enterprise and what you're selling, you might actually describe for me what your mission statement is. And that might feel like the main thing. But funders and lenders and investors, they also need to understand the value that's being exchanged. And so oftentimes this fits into one of these categories. So you might be selling a product, that's possible, or a service. Those two are fairly straightforward. Or you might actually be selling a cost savings, like reducing some expensive downstream problems. Or you might be selling a risk reduction. So you might be doing something that actually helps a system avoid harm or instability. But you want to be very clear about the value that you provide, not just about your mission statement. And the two are probably linked, but it's good to take a moment to really think about what is your revenue model going to be. And revenue, we can still think about revenue in this way, even if it's not just selling a product or a service. So to do that, it's helpful to think about who has the problem and who is actually paying to solve it. Sometimes in social enterprises, these are not always the same person. So there are three roles that can be really helpful to clarify. And the first one is who experiences the pain. So this is really who is directly facing the issue if your enterprise is trying to address. Number two, who benefits the most if it's solved. So this could be the person receiving the service, but it also could be the community, the system, or the institution within which you are involved. And then third, who is going to pay? So who has the budget authority? This really matters because revenue planning is going to depend less on who needs the service and more on who is willing and able to fund it. So I'd encourage you as you're putting together a plan to obtain financing, spend some time answering these three questions and map these out very clearly. It's going to help in your financing conversations. They'll become a lot easier. Now, very often with social enterprises, the person using the service is not the person paying for it or the group paying for it. So we might see models where, of course, the government's paying because the service reduces public costs. Or maybe interior health is paying because it improves health outcomes. Or the municipality or the city is paying because it strengthens company well-being. Or maybe even a local philanthropist is paying because perhaps what you do really aligns with the mission and impact that they like to focus on. And so these are called third party or subsidized models, and they're completely valid. So if this is the type of model that you need to sustain your enterprise with, that's no problem. But they do require you to really carefully think about if these are the folks that might be paying, third parties or subsidized models, what outcomes do those payers actually care about? And what is the problem that you are trying to solve for them? Because they're investing in value, they're going to want you to be able to answer those two questions. So, what outcome does the payer care about? And what problem are you trying to solve for them? Again, two questions that are helpful to have answers ready and prepared for to enter into those financing conversations. Another question to ask yourself and to be prepared to answer is who would feel the most pain if your organization disappeared tomorrow? So just take a minute to think about that. Is it the individual client? Is it a family? Is it a school district, a health system? Is it your local government? The answer to this question often will point you directly to what that true value proposition is and who your most likely payer is. It also will help you make the strongest case for financing. So I'd encourage you again, take that away, reflect on it, and prepare a response to it. So that way, when you have those financing conversations, you can demonstrate that your work is solving a real problem in a way that someone who values it is willing to pay for. Okay, so I talked a few moments ago about revenue, and revenue always starts with the customer. If we were in a for-profit model, entirely just a mainstream business, revenue starts with the customer. And now I've got customer in quotes because as we just talked about, who the customer is a little bit, could be a little bit different in a social enterprise model. So when we think about customer, we can also think about the payer. So when we talk about loans and investments, it's helpful to understand how the money is actually going to come in. And there's a few revenue models that might work in your enterprise. So the first is direct sales. So this is just the customer pays you directly. The second is third party payer. So someone else pays, like the government. Third, we have subsidized revenue. So this is where it's somewhat blended. We've got the customer paying part and a subsidy covers the rest. Fourth, blended revenue, where maybe you've got multiple revenue streams working together. Maybe you have some direct sales, but then maybe you also have some subsidized options. And then fourth, which gets even a little more complicated, or fifth, I should say, is cross subsidization. So this is where you might have one group paying more, so that way another group can pay less. And most social enterprises don't just rely on one revenue model. Often you can build better resilience and stronger sustainability by combining some models together to help you also present a much stronger case for obtaining financing. So once you know who pays, then the next big question is what will they actually pay? So pricing is one of the hardest areas for social enterprises. We want to stay accessible, but we also need to stay viable. So pricing needs to reflect three things. First, it needs to reflect alternatives. What are customers already doing instead? What's the cost of that? The second is budget realities. So even if people value your service and they really need it, do they have money allocated for it? Is there a budget out there on behalf of your payer or your customer? What can they afford? And then third is perceived value. So what is the outcome that they're buying, and what's the value you can attach to that? A very common trap with social enterprises is underpricing. And so sometimes we can have a tendency to underprice. We want to support, we want to, we're trying to do something for the social good, and that can feel generous. But at times, that can make the enterprise unsustainable. And it also can make lenders or financiers nervous. And so, while accessibility is really important, it needs to be very intentional and it needs to be supported by some sort of subsidy. It can't be accidental. We have to make sure that the good that you're doing and the value that you're providing can continue into the future. So whenever I'm talking about building revenue streams with upcoming businesses, one of the most important formulas is very simple, and it's revenue equals price times volume times timing. And so a lot of enterprises focus on price, and price does matter, but volume and timing matter just as much. So for example, you might decide that you're going to charge $100 per service. But if you only deliver five services per month, that's pretty limited revenue, $500. Or you might have really strong sales, but so you've got a good price and strong volume, but maybe payment on those sales is not going to happen for 60 days, but payroll is due next week. That's going to create a cash flow problem, and that becomes a really big issue. And many social enterprises don't fail because there's a lack of demand for what they do. They struggle because maybe they've set their price too low, or because revenue is slow or really unpredictable. And so getting ready to approach those financing conversations, it's important to be very honest with yourself, and then as you put your proposal together, about which of these, price, volume, or timing, is going to provide the most uncertainty, or it has the most risk in your model or in your enterprise now. And then I would layer onto that is, what can you do about that? Is there anything you can do about that to try to mitigate that risk? And having the answer to those questions is very helpful to have a successful financing conversation with a lender. Okay, so that's the pricing and the revenue. Now there's the other side of the equation, which is costs. And so, as I was saying earlier, one of the common mistakes with social enterprises is not being prepared for financial sustainability. And that can often happen when we underestimate the true costs of delivering impact. And sometimes this happens because you may be doing a lot of the parts of your enterprise right now yourself. And as you scale up, you may not be able to continue to operate at that scale. And so you may have to hire staff. And so you need to account for the staff time and those wages. And as operations scale, So do other expenses, direct expenses that are related to whatever it is that you're providing. In addition, overheads might change. So you may need to rent a space, get insurance, secure appropriate technology. All of those things come at a cost. And then, of course, we have administrative costs like bookkeeping, reporting, compliance, and coordination. And sometimes those administrative costs can be significant if they are required by a third party payer or contract. And so sometimes we have to incur these expenses even when perhaps we didn't think we needed them, but our lender might require them. So insurance is a great example. And so we have to when we're presenting what our expected costs are going to be, they need to be rooted in reality. And because obviously when costs are underestimated, that can damage the trust in the relationship and in the conversation with your lender. So part of financing readiness is being able to say, okay, what is it truly going to cost to deliver our product or our service or our offering to the community and to do it well? What is that actually going to look like at the scale we imagine we're going to get to? And so sometimes in these early stages, our revenues don't fully cover that true cost of delivering the work. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you failed or that the enterprise is not going to work out or it's not sustainable. It's a gap. We need to figure out what that gap is all about and why it exists. So if revenue doesn't fully cover the costs, especially early on, think about that and think about ways that you can fill that shortfall. So perhaps you might try to obtain a limited time grant, especially in those early stages for some testing and innovation. You might look for a service type contract where maybe you can find an institution to pay for the delivery. Maybe you seek out some philanthropy, look for someone in the community who feels that your impact outcomes align with their priorities. Look for patient capital. And so that's capital that is designed to be repayable, but it gives you a long runway to make payments. So that's where the patient comes from. And then again, that cross subsidization, where maybe you have a couple of revenue streams and one revenue stream is able to support another while you get that other off the ground. But really, the key message here is that financing can fill these gaps. But we have to be very mindful about what the gap is, why it exists, how long it's going to exist in the future, and how you're going to cover it. And again, having all of this in place, having documented it, thought through it before you have that conversation with your lender or funder is going to really help that conversation go the extra mile and build a tremendous amount of credibility for you. Okay, so profit is not the same as cash. And so you can be very technically very profitable on paper, but you still might run out of cash. And obviously, cash is king, as we say in accounting. And so we always want to make sure that we're very mindful of the difference between cash flows and profit. So again, going back to that example, you might invoice for a contract today. And maybe the payment terms don't require the payer to pay you for 60 days, but you've got expenses already due. That's a cash flow gap. And when we're thinking about obtaining financing, you can use debt as a way to cover these types of gaps. And so thinking about the use of debt in addition to some of these other sources is another way to help smooth cash flows, invest in growth, and maybe bridge some of these timing gaps. So often a question that we see is debt bad? Is it bad to take on debt? And I'd like to just reframe that. And so I think I'd reframe that to, is it the right tool for the stage and for your enterprise and all the other factors that are influencing the work that you do? And to help answer that, it's helpful to think about what's your broader plan for your organization. And there are a number of different planning tools that we can put together. And I'd encourage you to think about each of these four planning tools as you're putting together a package of information, again, to approach that funder or financer. So financing decisions are rarely made just based on the numbers. Oftentimes, lenders and financiers, they want to understand the whole plan. And with social enterprises, there are some additional aspects of this type of planning that are important. But the first three actually are relevant to any type of organization that's looking to get financing. So first, we need a business plan. And this really lays out what you sell, and to whom. Remember, go back. There's different ways to sell things. You could be selling risk mitigation or cost reduction, harm reduction. Second, a strategic plan. So this is where you're going and what success looks like. Business plan and strategic plan are not the same thing, though they have to be aligned, of course. And then third is the financial plan. And that's a lot about what we've been talking about today, is how your money flows, what capital is needed, what's your revenue model, what are your true costs, and what are some gaps that might exist. And then fourth, and this one is unique to social enterprises, and that's that impact plan. So what changes or what's going to happen because you exist, and how can you measure that? These four plans are distinct in nature, but they need to work together. If you can present the four plans in a way that they read together, but they tell their own unique perspective on what your enterprise is going to do, that alignment would is going to build significant confidence when you're going out and approaching a lender or financer. And the important thing to remember is that not all funders and not all lenders are looking for the same thing. They may have different expectations. And so when we have some of this information prepared in advance, then we start to have a conversation with the lender and financer, and we understand more about what they're looking for. So they are not always looking for the same things. They might be curious about what type of money you're interested in based on your stage, your model, your mission. But at the very heart, I will say that all funders are looking for you to have a very clear and credible and viable plan. So they're all interested in making sure that you will be able to be sustainable into the future. And so when we think about who are these financiers and lenders that I've been talking about, who might these organizations be? Well, there's kind of four key buckets. First, we have government and public sector. And so this type of lender is looking for public outcomes. They're looking for accountability and they're looking for alignment with their community priorities. So they're looking to see that what you're doing is also solving a problem for them. Then we have philanthropy and foundations. So they care deeply about the mission and the vision. They want to ensure that the leadership is credible and that the impact that you're going to provide is measurable. So that way they'll be able to ensure that there's a real return on their investment. And then we have investors and impact investors. So these could also be include investment co-ops. And they're looking for both impact, but also they're very much so looking for a realistic pathway to be paid back, or in the case of investors, to achieve some sort of return on their investment. And then finally, we have lenders, which is probably the one you are all very familiar with. And lenders, traditional lenders, and community-based lenders, they need to be interested in cash flows, repayment capacity, and making sure that you have the controls in place to manage your finances in a way that's going to ensure repayment capacity. So none of these funders are better or worse; they're just different. And determining which funder is right for you really depends on where you're at in your enterprise and what you're looking for. And maybe also thinking about how I just shared what the funders are looking for, how that aligns with what you're looking for out of a funder. Um, and so when we think about the funders, they're layering with the funders, there are different ways we can get money from those funders. So we've talked about revenue and costs and what funders are looking for. Now let's zoom into the ways we can get money from these funders. There are three different ways we can get money from these funders. First, we have grants and non-repayable funding. So that was kind of our initial thing we talked about early in the presentation. Second, we have loans and impact investing. This is money that we receive. It's repayable capital, so we have to repay it. And it's really designed for enterprises with a business model. And then third, we have community bonds. And community bonds help to harness local community investment. And really, the key message here is different types of capital and blends of capital might be useful at different stages depending on where you're at in your organization. You don't need to get All of these. You don't need to get financing from every different option or every different type of lender. Let's just take a moment and look a little bit deeper at community bonds. So, when we think about community bonds, they're especially relevant in smaller communities, place-based communities, and essentially a community bond is a loan that's repayable to your, and it's from your community. So, instead of borrowing just from a bank, you might be able to raise investment from the people in your community who believe in your mission and they want to support something local. And so community bonds are a way to mobilize some community interest and money. They also can align your mission with others in the community and also create a deeper sense of community. But they do come with responsibility. They are at their heart a bond. So this is a borrowing tool. This is not a grant. So it's important to be mindful of that there are repayment terms. They need to be set to be realistic and they need to be based on predictable cash flows that will enable you to repay the commitment that you have signed up for. And so, something to keep in mind is that very strong organizations are those that layer funding sources. So, when you layer funding sources and you don't just rely on one form of funding, this can really help your resiliency and your sustainability. Of course, if we only relied, for instance, on a grant, grants are generally time based, they're time bound. And what happens if we aren't able to renew that grant? And that's why we're having this conversation today. So, thinking about earned revenue through direct sales of products or services, grants, possibly loans, community bonds, layering in a blend of funding can be a great way to achieve sustainability and stability. All right, so just wrapping up before I turn it over to Carrie, just a few things I'd like to leave you with. And the first is to be very clear on your vision, but also what financial model is going to help you achieve that vision. The second is to spend some time thinking deeply about what your revenue model is going to be and what realistic costs look like to ensure that what you have planned is viable. The third is being mindful of who is going to pay and what value are they paying for. Know what the return on their investment is. So that way, when they ask you about it, you can talk about what the measurable value will look like over time. Fourth, measuring impact can really help attract future investment. So think about how your impact might be measurable and demonstrable. Fifth, I would encourage you to align your mission with your potential funders' priorities. Spend some time looking at your funders and getting a better sense of what they're looking for before you enter into those conversations. And really, I just the kind of the last thing I'd like to leave you with is this idea that when we're putting together our set of financial plans, layering them together with our business plan, our strategic plan, and our impact plan, it's about telling a story for your enterprise. And at the heart of it, related to our conversation today, it's about telling a story about how what you have planned for your enterprise is going to succeed into the future and continue to be viable on a sustainable basis. And it isn't just tied to some sort of external single funding source that if it were to not exist, it would jeopardize the impact of your organization. So it's kind of thinking more broadly into the future. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Carrie to talk a little bit more deeply about some financing options.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Maybe I'll get you to help me with the slides if that's possible. My name is Carrie Sanderman. I'm the investment fund manager at Community Futures East Kootenay. I've been at the organization for 18 years. I started out assisting in the self-employment program, reading business plans, and then that naturally led into commercial lending, which I've been doing for the last 12 years. And I'm really excited to be here today. Community Futures is a nonprofit. We are federally funded and we exist all in rural areas. So there's hopefully a Community Futures office nearby that can potentially assist you with some financing. We can have the next slide, Sarah. Great. So Community Futures are unique. We don't solely focus on credit. It is important how you treat your credit to kind of tells a story. However, we look at all 5 C's of lending, and they're shown here on the screen: character, capacity, conditions, capital, and collateral. So just briefly touch on them. Character is who we're lending to, whether it's individuals or the social enterprise. What experience maybe you have, or who do you have key people involved in the enterprise? Is there letters of support? And we do look at credit if possible. Quite often for social enterprises, there might not be a credit established, but that is something that we can work around. Capacity, do you have the team in place to operate the social enterprise? Do you, and like Sarah just went over, do you have everything in place with your business plan, your cash flows? Do you have the ability to repay the loan? And then in some cases, if you have employees, you want to be able to pay those employees, or if you're the owner of social enterprise, perhaps you might want to draw a wage. And then moving on to conditions, it's pretty straightforward. You've done all your research, you've looked at your competition, all of that is pretty evident in your business plan. We also look at risk analysis, what risks are out there, and then barriers to entry. Some of this could be financing. That's why you're coming for some working capital. That could be a barrier to entry. But also, do you need a specific business license to operate? And the fourth C is capital. Is there, some net worth either in the social enterprise? Is there ability to invest in the business? And is there ability to reinvest if needed? We're really unique at Community Futures as we actually help a lot with not-for-profits. So we have a kind of a little bit of a different set of rules. We'll look at the same thing for social enterprises. I know not all social enterprises are not-for-profit, some are for-profit, but we're really flexible with who we lend to. So I just want to reiterate that. And the last C is collateral. Again, flexible with this for not-for-profits. Is there any assets you can pledge? Do you own any equipment? Do you have any inventory? And then personal guarantees I'll touch on. We always try to take a personal guarantee where possible. This kind of backstops the security position. For a true not-for-profit, though, we do waive personal guarantees, which is why we do help with a lot of not-for-profits for financing, is the traditional banks most times are not able to waive that. Although I do believe the credit unions can sometimes assist with that. Okay, have the next slide, Sarah. Great. So financing options, as Sarah went over, there's lots of different types of funding and financing. And like she mentioned, it's really important to layer. And, lending is a tool and it has to be timed for when you need it. So there's lots of different investment options. There's personal investment. Do you have some personal savings? Can you draw from some home equity to put into the business? There's also what we call patient capital, which we find a lot lately with family and friends offering to help finance a business. It's important to have clear expectations right from the beginning. If you are going to loan a family member money or receive money, you want to have that important conversation on what the expectations are for repayment of that. Are they paying interest? And it's almost worthy to do a promissory note, perhaps, so that's all kind of outlined. So that is a strong option for a lot of people. And then there's the category of developmental lenders. We operate outside of traditional lenders. So there's Community Futures, WeBC, Futurepreneur, and BDC as well, Business Development Bank of Canada. We are all here to assist entrepreneurs that don't fit in that tight box of financing with banks and the credit unions. That being said, we work hand in hand with all the banks and credit unions. We provide referrals back and forth. They can offer a lot of options that we can't: credit cards, bank accounts, line of credits. So they're definitely a great option, especially if you're already operating. They might be able to have a look at financing you. And then we'll talk lastly about dangerous lenders. Credit card rates are only ever increasing. That's a tough way to start out financing a business. If you are financing a business on credit cards, it's time to look at other financing options. And private equity lenders, again, you got to be careful and upfront of what that looks like, what the repayment schedule is. The term is really key. You don't want to get into a situation where all of a sudden you have to suddenly find a new lender to take out that private equity. And then factoring lenders is something to be conscientious of. We find that quite often in retail and restaurant. businesses where it's easy to get some fast cash with your point of sale machine. There's always lots of opportunities. So, hey, apply now for $10,000, and then they take a percentage of your money earned daily, and that's kind of hard thing to get out of. But there's lots of options. So WBC focuses on women entrepreneurs. Futurepreneur focuses on young entrepreneurs under the age of 39, I believe. So there's lots of opportunities to check out their websites. Those two programs also offer mentorship. So if you need additional mentorship, those two I would highly recommend. And if I could have the next slide. So like I had mentioned, Community Futures are located all across BC. There's 34 offices in British Columbia. I'm located here in Cranbrook in the East Kootenay. We're serviced south of Cranbrook, north to Golden, and east to the Elk Valley. So we have quite a large service area. And then we have all our friends in the other Kootenay offices. Our Community Futures British Columbia oversees all of us. And if you're not in one of these areas, you can go onto their website and find the local Community Futures office in your area. We work quite closely with the other offices, doing referrals back and forth. We're really kind of a tight-knit lender group. So, if you need to reach out to someone and don't know who to contact, contact me and I can let you know and give that lender a heads up. But we're a friendly group, so please do reach out. Then the last slide, online resources. So this is a huge resource that we've launched over the last couple of years with Community Futures. It's called My Community Futures. And it's a great program that provides you a lot of training that is offered for free. So it's a lot of online workshops, and there's some business coaching availability. And there's a lot of categories if you need help with HR or marketing, or you need to talk to a lawyer. They had a CRA session not that long ago. So we really urge you to check out. If you Google My Community Futures, you can sign up for an account for free, and you get to, oh, thank you, Robin, for putting that in. You can sign up for an account for free and then view all of the listings, the offerings. Some of them are live and some of them are recorded. So we know busy entrepreneurs, sometimes you aim to attend something, but then of course you're not able to. But so we're really happy to be here today to present to you. We are very flexible with terms and interest-only payment schedules, seasonal schedules. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for so much information and ideas. And I know that financing can seem quite terrifying for a lot of people, especially when you've been coming from a nonprofit, maybe to start thinking about it. So thank you so much for the opportunity of sharing all your knowledge today. So we're going to stop the recording now.